The auditorium was quiet, filled with the faint smell of polish and dust. Rows of empty seats faced a grand piano that shone under the soft lights. Every day after classes ended, the place became almost her little world. The girl walked in quietly, holding a cleaning cloth and a small bottle of spray. She was there to clean, to make sure everything looked perfect for the next day's rehearsals. But deep down she had another reason for coming, one she never spoke about to anyone. She always paused near the piano. The black and white keys looked so beautiful to her, like a language she wanted to understand but never got the chance to learn. She would glance around the room to make sure no one was watching, then slowly stretch her fingers to touch one of the keys. The sound, soft and pure, echoed through the empty hall. That tiny note meant something to her. It was a secret between her and the piano. At home, her life was simple and quiet. She lived with her mother in a small apartment on the edge of the town. Money was tight. Her mother worked long hours, and they never had enough for extra things like music lessons. But that never stopped her from loving music. She had an old keyboard that someone had thrown away years ago. It was missing a few keys and the sound sometimes crackled, but to her it was magic. Every evening, after finishing her homework and helping her mother, she would sit on the floor and play random notes, trying to copy the tunes she heard online or from the radio. She didn't know how to read music sheets. She learned everything by listening. When she heard a melody she liked, she would try to replay it until it sounded right. Sometimes it took hours, but she didn't mind. Those were her favorite moments, the ones that made her feel free. At school, she wasn't popular. She was quiet and often kept to herself. The music students in particular barely noticed her. To them, she was just the girl who cleaned up after their rehearsals. They didn't know she stayed behind, not because she needed the money, but because she loved being near the sound of the piano. One day, while cleaning near the stage, she overheard the music club practicing for their annual concert. The pianist was a tall, confident boy who played loud and fast, showing off every time the teacher praised him. The others admired him, but she could tell that his playing was about perfection, not emotion. Still, he was good, very good, and she often found herself quietly studying his movements from a distance. That day, after the rehearsal ended and everyone left, she walked up to the piano again. The lid was still open, and a few pages of sheet music were lying on top. She looked at them curiously. The symbols and lines were like a code she couldn't read. She gently pressed a few keys, trying to match the sound to what she remembered from the practice earlier. Slowly, she began to hum, finding her own rhythm. The music wasn't perfect, but it was filled with heart. She didn't realize that one of the younger music students had come back to grab his forgotten bag. When he saw her playing, he laughed out loud. "Hey, what are you doing? You can't just touch that piano. It's expensive." Startled, she pulled her hands away and looked down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was just cleaning," he smirked. "Yeah, sure. Cleaning with your fingers? You don't even know what you're pressing." His laughter echoed as he walked out, still shaking his head. That moment stayed with her all night. She wasn't angry, just embarrassed. Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't belong near that piano. But something inside her refused to give up. She promised herself that one day she'd play something that would make people listen, not laugh. The next few weeks went by quietly. The concert date was getting closer, and the auditorium was always busy with rehearsals. She continued to work there, cleaning in the background, unnoticed. The pianist practiced every day, sometimes arguing with others when things didn't sound perfect. The teacher often told them, "Music isn't only about technique. It's about feeling." But they never seemed to understand. Late one afternoon, after the final rehearsal of the day, she stayed behind again. The sun was setting outside, painting the room with golden light. She walked up to the piano and sat on the bench. Her hands rested gently on the keys. She closed her eyes and began to play one of the tunes she had practiced at home. A soft, emotional melody she had created herself. Her fingers moved carefully but gracefully. The sound was fragile, but it carried something deep, something honest. For a moment she forgot where she was. The world outside disappeared. There was only her, the piano, and the sound of her heart coming alive through the notes. When she finished, the hall was silent. She smiled softly, unaware that someone had seen the whole thing. The next day, whispers started going around the club. The same boy who had mocked her told his friends what he saw, exaggerating the story. "You should have seen her," he said, laughing. "She sat there like she was in a movie scene. Probably thought she was some great pianist. His friends joined in, laughing too. By the time she entered the hall that afternoon to clean, a few students were already watching her. The pianist smirked as she passed by. "Hey, don't touch my piano today, all right?" he said loudly. "We don't want it to get dirty." The others laughed, and she felt her face turn red. She nodded quietly and began sweeping the floor, pretending not to hear them. But inside, she felt something growing, something between sadness and determination. She wasn't angry at them. She just wished she could make them understand what music meant to her. To her, the piano wasn't a symbol of status or talent. It was a way to express everything she couldn't say out loud. That night, she sat at home in front of her broken keyboard again. Her mother noticed the sadness in her eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently. The girl hesitated, but then shook her head. "No, it's nothing." Her mother smiled softly. "You've always loved music. Don't let anyone make you feel small because of it. You don't need to prove anything to them." Her mother's words comforted her, but she still couldn't shake the thought of the laughter and the looks she had received. She stayed up late that night, practicing until her fingers hurt. Every wrong note made her more determined to get better. In the following days, she continued to work quietly. The students stopped paying attention to her, returning to their routines. The pianist grew even more arrogant as the concert drew near, boasting about how he would impress everyone with his performance. The teacher, though, seemed slightly worried. He could feel that the group lacked emotion, something that music needs most. Meanwhile, the girl spent every moment she could near the piano, even if it was just to dust it. Each time she touched it, even for a second, she felt a spark of joy. She didn't know that this same piano in this same hall would soon witness something that would change her life forever. One afternoon, the teacher arrived late for rehearsal. The students grew restless and began chatting. The pianist was showing off a fast piece to his friends when he accidentally knocked over a bottle of water. The liquid spilled across the piano and over the stack of sheet music. He jumped back in panic, cursing under his breath. The others scrambled to clean the mess, but the paper was ruined. The girl, who had been sweeping in the corner, rushed forward with a clean cloth. "Let me help," she said softly. She wiped the piano carefully, making sure not to damage it. As she worked, her hand accidentally pressed a few keys. A soft, pleasant sound filled the air. Everyone turned toward her. The pianist frowned. "Hey, I told you not to touch that," he snapped. Another student, half amused, said, "Relax, it's not like she's going to break it. Let her press a few keys if she wants." The girl froze. Her heart was racing. For the first time, everyone was looking at her, not as the cleaner, but as someone about to do something unexpected. She hesitated, unsure if she should walk away or sit down. She looked at the piano again, at those beautiful keys waiting in front of her. Something inside whispered, "Maybe this is your chance." She sat down slowly, her hands trembling. The others watched in silence, half expecting her to embarrass herself. But she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In that single breath, she remembered every night she had spent practicing, every moment she had dreamed of playing freely. Then, her fingers began to move, and though it would only last a few moments, what she was about to do would leave the entire room silent, and it would mark the beginning of something none of them could have imagined. The next morning, the auditorium was filled with chatter and laughter. The students from the music club were getting ready for another long day of rehearsal. The concert was only a few days away, and everyone wanted to make sure everything was perfect. The grand piano stood proudly at the center of the stage, shining under the soft lights. The girl walked in quietly as always, carrying a bucket and a cloth. She was there to clean before the rehearsal began. No one paid much attention to her. They were too busy tuning their instruments, checking sheet music and joking around. She moved slowly, wiping the chairs and sweeping the stage floor. Every time she passed the piano, she couldn't help but glance at it. It wasn't just an instrument to her. It was something almost alive, something that called to her. But after what happened the day before, she tried her best to stay away. Still, she could feel the piano's pull. The thought of sitting there even for a second made her heart race. The pianist, who always acted like he owned the stage, noticed her eyes drifting toward the instrument. He smirked and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Don't even think about it. This isn't some toy for beginners." A few students laughed. One of them added, "Yeah, maybe she wants to give us a concert." She looked down and kept wiping the floor, pretending she didn't hear them. But inside, her chest tightened. The laughter felt heavier this time. It wasn't the first time people had looked down on her, but hearing it in a place she loved the most, around music, hurt differently. Still, she didn't say anything. She just kept working quietly, reminding herself that she wasn't there for them. She was there because she loved being close to the sound, to the feeling that music gave her. The teacher entered the hall soon after, holding a notebook and a cup of tea. He clapped his hands once and said, "All right, everyone, let's focus. The concert is in 3 days. We still have work to do." The students quickly stopped talking and took their places. The girl stepped aside and stood near the corner, making sure she wouldn't disturb anyone. She liked watching the rehearsals. It was her favorite part of the day. Even if they didn't want her there, she couldn't resist listening. The pianist started playing. His fingers moved quickly, hitting every note perfectly. The sound was strong and sharp, but to her ears something felt missing. It was beautiful, yes, but empty. It didn't make her feel anything. The teacher noticed it too. After the piece ended, he said gently, "That was good, but try to feel it more. You're playing the notes, but not the story behind them." The pianist frowned slightly. "I'm playing exactly what's written." The teacher smiled patiently. "Yes, but music isn't only about what's written. It's about what's felt. Try again. Imagine the emotion behind the sound." The pianist sighed but started again. The girl listened closely. She could tell he was trying, but the emotion still didn't reach his fingers. It was all precision, no soul. As they practiced, a few of the singers missed their cues and the violinist got frustrated when her bow slipped. Tension filled the room. The teacher tried to calm them down, reminding them that mistakes were part of learning. The girl quietly picked up a few crumpled pages from the floor and placed them neatly on the side table. No one noticed, but she liked helping. She felt like part of something bigger when she did. After 2 hours, the group finally took a break. Some went to get water. Others sat chatting in small groups. The pianist stayed near the piano, complaining about how no one could match his timing. The girl stayed in her corner, drinking from her small bottle of water. She watched the way they all interacted, confident, loud, full of energy. They seemed to belong there. She didn't. One of the girls from the choir walked past and whispered to her friend, "I don't get why she's always hanging around." "It's weird," her friend shrugged. "She probably just likes to listen." "Let her." But the pianist overheard and laughed. "Listen, more like pretending she can play. I bet she doesn't even know what a scale is." Their laughter spread again. The girl looked down, pretending to clean a chair that was already spotless. She could feel her cheeks burn, but she didn't say a word. The teacher returned and the room quieted again. "Let's go over the main piece once more," he said. "We'll do it without the vocals this time. Just the piano and strings." The girl watched closely as the pianist took his seat again. The music began, and though it sounded good, she noticed small mistakes that no one else seemed to hear. A few misplaced notes, a rhythm slightly off. She could tell because she had spent hours listening to this same piece online, replaying it over and over at home. When the teacher stopped them halfway, the pianist groaned. "What now?" The teacher said calmly, "It's close, but it needs more flow. Don't rush the middle section," the pianist muttered under his breath, easy for him to say, and began again. As the day went on, frustration grew in the room. The group was tired. The pianist was annoyed. The teacher was losing patience, and the girl just kept cleaning, silently observing it all. When rehearsal finally ended, everyone packed up quickly, eager to leave. The teacher stayed behind, talking to the pianist about slowing down and expressing more feeling. The girl waited near the exit, not wanting to interrupt. After a few minutes, the teacher left too. The pianist, still irritated, sat down and played a few fast notes, showing off even though no one was watching. When he noticed her standing there, he smirked again. "Still here?" he asked. She nodded quietly. "Just cleaning up," he rolled his eyes. "You really like hanging around, don't you? What, planning to become a musician or something?" She didn't answer. She just bent down to pick up a piece of paper near his foot. He laughed and said, "Come on then. Since you're so interested, why don't you play something? Let's see what you've got." She froze. I can't," she said softly. He leaned back in the chair. "Didn't think so." He stood up, stretched, and walked toward the door. "Don't touch it while I'm gone." You'll ruin the tuning, he added with a grin. When he left, the hall fell silent again. The girl stood there for a long moment staring at the piano. She wanted to leave, but something inside her stopped her. She took a deep breath and walked slowly to the piano. She sat down, her heart pounding. The keys looked brighter under the light, almost inviting her. She hesitated, then pressed one softly. The sound was gentle, echoing through the empty hall. She pressed another and another, forming a small melody. She remembered every note she had practiced on her broken keyboard at home. Her fingers started moving naturally, finding rhythm and emotion. The melody flowed like a quiet river, smooth and alive. If anyone had been there, they would have been stunned. The sound was not perfect, but it had something rare, soul. It felt like her music was telling a story, one that had been waiting to be heard. She didn't notice that the teacher had returned, standing quietly at the door. He watched her, surprised and moved. The way she played wasn't technical, it was emotional, raw, honest. When she finally finished, she looked up and saw him there. She froze, terrified that she was in trouble. The teacher smiled softly. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." He shook his head. "Don't apologize. Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated. "Just at home. On an old keyboard. I don't really know how to read music," he nodded slowly. "Well, you have something special. Music like that doesn't come from lessons. It comes from the heart." Before she could say anything more, the pianist's voice came from behind the teacher. "What's going on here?" He had come back to grab his jacket and froze when he saw her at the piano. The teacher smiled again and said, "She was just showing me something." The pianist crossed his arms. "You're kidding, right? She doesn't even belong in this room." The teacher looked at him calmly. Sometimes talent comes from unexpected places. The pianist scoffed and walked out, shaking his head. The girl sat there quietly, unsure what to feel. The teacher placed a hand on the piano and said softly, "Don't stop playing. You have a gift. Use it." As he walked away, she sat there for a long moment staring at the keys. Her heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from hope. She didn't know what would happen next, but something told her that life was about to change in a way she never imagined. The morning sun poured through the windows of the school auditorium, lighting up the dust floating in the air. The concert was only 2 days away, and everyone was under pressure. The music club had gathered early to rehearse for what would be their final run before the big event. The girl arrived as usual, holding her cleaning supplies. She quietly stepped into the hall, but her eyes went first to the piano. It stood at the center of the stage, polished and perfect. The same piano that made her heart beat faster every time she saw it. She still remembered the teacher's kind words from the other day. "You have a gift. Use it." Those words had echoed in her mind all night. For the first time, someone had said something that made her believe her music mattered. It had given her courage. But courage was hard to hold on to in that room. The pianist was already there, sitting with a group of his friends. The moment he saw her, he smirked. "Look who's back," he said. "Don't worry, the piano's safe today." His friends laughed quietly. She said nothing. She just began cleaning near the back of the hall, pretending not to hear. Still, a part of her wanted to walk up to him and play something, just to prove she wasn't the joke he thought she was. But she didn't, not yet. The teacher entered and clapped his hands. "All right, everyone. This is our last major rehearsal. Tomorrow we'll rest and make small adjustments. Let's make it count." Everyone took their places. The pianist stretched his fingers dramatically, ready to impress. The teacher nodded and the music began. At first, everything went smoothly. The strings came in softly, the singers followed, and the pianist played fast and precise. But after a few minutes, something felt off. The rhythm was slipping. The violinist missed a cue, and one of the singers came in late. The pianist slammed his hand on the keys in frustration. "This is ridiculous," he said. "How am I supposed to play with people who can't keep up?" The teacher sighed. "Take a break." "Getting angry won't help," the students murmured among themselves. Some were tired, others annoyed. The girl quietly moved to the side of the stage, picking up a few fallen sheets of music. One of them had a coffee stain on it. She wiped it gently and placed it back on the piano stand. The pianist rolled his eyes. "You don't have to touch that. I can handle my own things." The teacher gave him a look. "She's helping. Be polite." The pianist didn't reply, but his expression said enough. As the group took their break, the teacher walked over to the girl. "Thank you for helping," he said kindly. "You always make this place feel calm," she smiled shyly. "I just like being around the music," she said softly. He nodded. "I can tell." Before he could say more, one of the students accidentally bumped into a stand, knocking over a cup of juice. The liquid splashed across the sheet music and part of the piano keys. The pianist jumped up in panic. "Hey, watch what you're doing," he shouted. The teacher quickly grabbed some tissues, but the spill was large. The girl ran over with a cloth and started wiping the piano gently, careful not to press too hard on the keys. The pianist, still upset, said sharply, "Don't touch it." "You'll scratch it." The teacher frowned. "She's helping." You could learn from that attitude. The boy muttered under his breath and crossed his arms, standing aside. The girl continued wiping until the piano was dry. Then, without realizing it, her hand brushed a few keys and a soft sound escaped. The note hung in the air like a whisper. For some reason, it felt different, gentle and warm. A few students looked over. One of them grinned. "Hey, maybe we should let her play for real. Maybe she's better than you." Laughter filled the room again, but the teacher didn't laugh. He just looked thoughtful. "Actually," he said after a moment, "why not?" The laughter stopped. The pianist stared. "You're not serious," the teacher smiled. "She's always here listening carefully. Let's see what she can do." "It's just for fun." The girl froze. Her hands went cold. I can't," she whispered. "I don't know how to read music." "That's all right," the teacher said gently. "Play something from your heart." "Anything you like." All eyes were on her. She looked around and saw the pianist smirk, the other students' curious expressions, the teacher's calm smile. Her heart beat so fast she could hear it in her ears. For a moment she thought about running out of the room. But then she remembered the nights she spent at home, playing on her broken keyboard. She remembered how music made her forget everything else. The teasing, the loneliness, the fear. She took a deep breath and slowly sat on the piano bench. The seat felt larger than usual and her hands trembled as they hovered over the keys. "Go ahead," the teacher said softly. She nodded slightly and pressed one note, then another. At first the sound was uncertain, like a shy voice speaking for the first time. Then her fingers began to move with more confidence. The melody started to form, a piece she had created herself long ago. It wasn't something she'd learned. It was something she had felt. The room went silent. Every sound, every whisper stopped. The students who had been laughing earlier stood frozen. The music was soft but full of emotion. It rose and fell like a memory, like a quiet story being told without words. Her fingers glided across the keys, not perfectly, but beautifully. Each note carried something real, something honest. The melody seemed to fill every corner of the hall, wrapping the listeners in its warmth. The pianist, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened slowly. He had never heard that tune before. It wasn't complicated, yet it had something he couldn't replicate. Heart. The teacher watched closely, his eyes shining with quiet pride. He had seen many students play over the years, but this was rare. When she reached the final note, the sound lingered for a moment, then faded into silence. She sat there with her hands still on the keys, afraid to look up. No one spoke. The room was so quiet that even the sound of the air conditioner seemed distant. Finally, the teacher broke the silence. "That," he said softly, "was music." The students slowly started to clap. It wasn't a polite clap, it was genuine. Even the ones who had laughed before looked surprised. The girl turned slightly, unsure how to react. Her face turned pink and she whispered, "I'm sorry." "I didn't mean to." The teacher shook his head. "Never apologize for talent." The pianist walked forward, still looking stunned. He studied the keys, then looked at her. What was that piece?" She hesitated. "Something I made at home," she said quietly. "I don't know what it's called." He blinked. "You made that?" She nodded slowly. The teacher smiled. "You see, music isn't only about reading notes. It's about understanding feeling. You all could learn something from her today." The students exchanged looks, half embarrassed, half inspired. The pianist said nothing. For once, he had no sarcastic comment. As rehearsal ended, people began to leave, still talking about what they had just heard. Some said they couldn't believe she had never studied music before. Others wondered if she would play again at the concert. The girl stayed back to finish cleaning, but this time her steps felt lighter. The same people who once mocked her had seen something different in her today. Maybe for the first time they saw her not as the cleaner, but as someone who belonged on that stage. As she packed her things, the teacher walked up to her again. "You should think about joining the music club," he said. She looked at him surprised. "Me?" he smiled. "Yes, you. You don't need fancy lessons to be a musician. You already are one." She didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. All she could manage was a soft, "Thank you." The teacher patted her shoulder kindly and left. The girl turned back to the piano. The lights from the ceiling reflected off the shiny surface. She walked over and gently touched the keys once more, letting her fingers rest there. A small smile formed on her face. For the first time, the piano didn't feel like something distant or forbidden. It felt like home. That night, when she returned home, she told her mother what had happened. Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she listened. She hugged her tightly and whispered, "I always knew you were meant for something special." The girl didn't sleep much that night. She kept thinking about the faces of those who had listened to her play, the surprise, the silence, the applause. It was a moment she would never forget. Tomorrow, she knew, things might be different. People might look at her differently now. Maybe the pianist would still act proud. Maybe the laughter would return. But none of that mattered anymore because now she knew the truth. She didn't need anyone's permission to play. She didn't need anyone's approval to dream. The music she carried inside her was real, and soon the whole world would hear it. The morning of the concert rehearsal felt different. The air inside the auditorium carried a kind of quiet tension, a mix of excitement and nerves. Chairs were neatly arranged, the stage lights tested, and the grand piano stood in its usual place, polished until it gleamed. The girl walked in, clutching her cleaning cloth and small spray bottle, but her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't thinking about dust or chairs or the floor today. She was thinking about the moment when she had played in front of everyone. The sound, the silence afterward, the clapping. It all replayed in her mind like a dream she couldn't wake from. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. Still, she wasn't sure what would happen today. Maybe they would ignore her again. Maybe they would laugh. Or maybe, just maybe, they would see her as someone who belonged near that piano. The music club was already gathering on stage. The teacher was checking the final notes on his clipboard, giving quick instructions to the students. The pianist sat proudly at the piano, but his usual arrogance seemed dimmed. He hadn't forgotten what happened the day before. When the girl passed by, some of the students nodded politely. A few even smiled. It felt strange but nice, like something was slowly changing. The teacher called everyone's attention. "All right," he said. "This is our final rehearsal before the concert. Let's do it properly. No distractions." Everyone nodded. The pianist stretched his fingers. The singers took deep breaths. The violins tuned softly. The girl stood quietly in the corner holding a broom. She didn't plan to play today. She was just there to help. But deep inside, something in her chest felt restless, a small spark that refused to go away. The rehearsal began. The opening notes filled the hall, strong and graceful. The pianist played confidently, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. The teacher watched carefully, listening for mistakes. Halfway through the piece, something went wrong. One of the violin strings snapped with a sharp sound. The violinist gasped and stopped playing. The singers lost rhythm. The pianist hesitated, his hands faltering. The music fell apart in seconds. The teacher sighed. "All right, take 5 minutes. Everyone relax." The pianist leaned back in frustration. "This is a disaster," he muttered. "Why does everything have to go wrong today?" The girl quietly put down her broom and walked up the stage to help pick up the broken string. The pianist shot her a look but said nothing. She placed the string aside and gently wiped the piano keys with a soft cloth, as she always did. Her hand lingered for a second on the keys. She didn't press anything, but even that small touch made her heart race. The teacher, watching from a distance, noticed her hesitation and smiled. "You can play something while we fix the violin," he said casually. Her head snapped up. "Me?" he nodded. "Just a short melody. The sound check is done anyway. Let's have some music in the room." The pianist frowned but said nothing. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Sure, let her play," he said under his breath. The girl hesitated. Her hands felt cold. She looked at the piano. the same one that had scared her days ago, the same one that had made her dream last night. The teacher gave her an encouraging nod. She took a slow breath and sat down. For a moment, everything around her went still. The chatter in the hall faded. Even the students fixing the violin stopped to look her way. Her fingers touched the keys, soft and unsure at first. Then the first note came, light and pure. The sound echoed through the empty space. She pressed another key, then another, finding a rhythm that felt familiar, a melody she had played many nights at home. The teacher lowered his clipboard slowly, his expression softening. The notes began to flow more smoothly now, each one following the last like waves on a calm sea. The girl's eyes closed as she played. Her fear disappeared. The music wasn't just coming from her hands, it was coming from her heart. The sound rose and fell, gentle but filled with emotion. It spoke without words. It told of quiet dreams, of nights spent alone with broken keys, of laughter she had learned to ignore, of hope that refused to die. The students listened in silence. The same people who had mocked her only days ago now stood frozen. Even the pianist, who had crossed his arms at first, found himself leaning forward slightly, watching her fingers move. There was something in the way she played, something he couldn't understand. Her hands didn't follow a pattern, yet every sound made sense. Every note carried feeling. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was real. The hall was filled with music that didn't sound like practice or performance. It sounded like life itself. As the melody climbed higher, her fingers moved faster, more confidently. Then slowly the sound softened again, as if the music itself was saying goodbye. The final note hung in the air for a few seconds before fading into silence. No one moved. The room was still. Her hands stayed on the piano. She didn't dare to look up. The silence felt heavier than any applause. Then suddenly someone started clapping, slow at first, then louder. It was the teacher. Soon the others joined in, filling the hall with applause. The girl finally looked up, her eyes wide in surprise. Her cheeks turned red and she tried to stand, but the teacher gestured for her to stay seated. "That," he said softly, "was what I've been trying to teach all week." The pianist looked away, his jaw tight. He had played the same piano hundreds of times, but never once had he seen it sound like that. It was almost as if the piano itself came alive for her. The teacher walked closer and asked, "Where did you learn to play with such emotion?" She smiled shyly. "I didn't learn, I just feel it," he nodded slowly. "That's what real music is." The students kept clapping. Some even shouted compliments, and that was amazing. "How did you do that?" "You should perform at the concert." She shook her head quickly. "No, I can't. I'm not part of the club." The teacher looked thoughtful. "Maybe you should be." The pianist finally spoke. "The concert's tomorrow. We don't have time for changes." The teacher turned to him. "Sometimes the best moments aren't planned." The pianist looked away, clearly unhappy, but said nothing more. When rehearsal ended, the students left in small groups, still talking about her playing. The teacher stayed behind and told her, "You reminded everyone what music truly means today." She smiled softly. "I was just playing what I feel." "That's exactly why it worked," he said. As she packed her things, the pianist approached quietly. His expression wasn't cruel this time, just thoughtful. "You play differently," he said. She hesitated. "Is that a bad thing?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it's just real." Then he walked away. For a long moment, she stood alone in the middle of the stage. The lights above her glowed softly, and the piano sat quietly as if waiting for her next touch. She ran her fingers gently across the keys, smiling to herself. When she left the hall that evening, the world outside felt brighter. The air smelled like rain, and the wind carried the faint hum of music in the distance. She walked home slowly, her heart full. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe the teacher would really let her play again. Maybe not, but even if she never touched that piano again, she knew she had already done something special. She had turned silence into sound. She had made people listen. At home that night, she sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. The lights from nearby buildings flickered gently. She placed her small, broken keyboard on her lap and began to play the same melody again, the one that had made everyone silent. Her mother listened from the next room, smiling quietly. For the first time, the girl didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel like the cleaner or the quiet girl who didn't belong. She felt like someone who finally found her voice. Tomorrow would be the concert. She didn't know if she'd be on stage or sitting in the audience. But one thing was certain. No matter where she was, her heart would be in every note that was played. Because music, she now understood, wasn't just something you hear. It was something you live. And that day in the auditorium, the moment when silence met her melody, was the beginning of everything she had ever dreamed of. The morning of the concert was filled with nervous energy. The auditorium buzzed with voices, footsteps, and the faint rustling of music sheets. The lights were being tested again, and rows of chairs waited for guests who would soon arrive. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone except the quiet girl who stood near the stage, unsure if she should even be there. She had come early, carrying her usual cleaning cloth, pretending she was just helping, not waiting for anything else, but deep inside her heart hoped for something more. Maybe the teacher would let her stay for the concert. Maybe she could just listen to the piano again. The teacher noticed her as he gave last-minute instructions to the performers. "You're here early again," he said with a kind smile. She nodded softly. "I came to make sure everything's clean before the guests come." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "You know, everyone's still talking about what you played yesterday." Her face turned red. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't cause trouble," he interrupted gently. "You reminded them what music feels like." Before she could answer, a group of students entered carrying instruments. Among them was the pianist. His usual confident posture seemed more serious today. He avoided her eyes, focusing instead on tuning his notes and arranging his sheets. The teacher gathered everyone. "All right, today's performance is important. But remember, music isn't about showing off. It's about sharing something real." The girl listened quietly, standing by the curtains. She wished she could play again, but she didn't dare ask. She was happy just being there. The guests began to arrive. Parents, teachers, and students filled the hall. The low hum of conversation mixed with the sound of programs rustling. The teacher stepped up to the microphone and welcomed everyone warmly. Then the performances began. The first few acts went smoothly. Some sang, some played violin, some performed small duets. The audience clapped politely after each one. Then came the piano performance. The pianist walked to the grand piano, took a deep breath, and began playing. His fingers moved quickly, hitting every note perfectly. The sound filled the room, strong, confident, practiced. Yet for some reason, it didn't touch the heart. It was beautiful, yes, but empty. The teacher listened carefully, his face thoughtful. When the piece ended, the applause was polite but not passionate. The pianist stood and bowed, but his eyes darted toward the teacher, who looked back at him with a small, knowing smile. After a short pause, the teacher walked to the microphone. "Before we continue," he said, "I'd like to share something special that happened during our rehearsal yesterday." The audience quieted. The pianist froze slightly. The girl, standing near the curtains, looked confused. The teacher continued. "One of our helpers, someone who doesn't even belong to the music club, played something from her heart. And it reminded us all what music truly means. I think everyone here deserves to hear that." The girl's breath caught. Was he talking about her? The pianist's jaw tightened. "You mean her?" he asked quietly. The teacher nodded. "Yes, would you mind giving her your seat for one moment?" The pianist hesitated, then sighed and stepped aside. The teacher turned toward the girl. "Come on up," he said gently. "Let them hear what you played yesterday." She froze where she stood. "Me? No, I can't. This is the concert." "I'm not supposed to," he smiled kindly. "You don't need to be on the list to play something honest." The audience murmured softly, curious. The girl's heart pounded. Every part of her wanted to run away, but something stronger held her there. A small voice whispering that this moment was hers. Slowly, she walked onto the stage. The lights felt bright, almost blinding. Her hands trembled as she sat down at the piano. For a second, she stared at the keys, unable to breathe. Then she remembered how it felt yesterday, the calm that came when the music began. She closed her eyes and let her fingers touch the keys. The first note came out soft, fragile, almost like a whisper, then another and another. Soon the melody began to grow, each sound flowing into the next like water finding its path. The audience fell silent. The music filled the room, not loud, not complex, but deep. Every note seemed to carry a feeling: loneliness, hope, courage. It was as if the piano itself was speaking for her. The teacher stood near the stage, watching with quiet pride. Parents in the crowd leaned forward. Some closed their eyes. Even the pianist standing in the corner found himself listening without envy this time. The girl's hands moved gracefully now, her confidence building with every chord. She wasn't thinking of the people watching her. She wasn't thinking of the lights or the stage. She was back in that small room at home, sitting in front of her broken keyboard, lost in the sound she loved most. When the final note came, it lingered in the air for a few seconds before fading into silence. The room stayed still. Then, all at once, the applause erupted, louder, fuller, more real than any before. People stood up, clapping and cheering. The teacher's eyes shone with pride. The girl looked stunned. She stood, unsure of what to do. The teacher came up beside her and gently guided her to the microphone. He said softly, "Tell them, where did you learn to play like that?" She looked out at the sea of faces, her voice trembling. "I didn't learn. I just listened and practiced when no one was around." The audience clapped again, some smiling warmly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The teacher turned to the crowd. "Talent is not always found where we expect it. Sometimes it's hidden in the quietest corners." The pianist stepped forward slowly. He looked at her, then said, "I didn't believe you could play." "But I was wrong," she smiled gently. "It's okay. I didn't believe I could either." The teacher put a hand on her shoulder. "I want you to come to my class. I'll help you study music properly if you're willing." Her eyes widened. "You mean I can join?" He nodded. "If you're ready to work hard, yes." Tears filled her eyes. "I will. I promise." The applause started again, softer this time but filled with warmth. After the concert ended, many people came up to her. Parents, students, even teachers she had never met before told her how beautiful her playing was. Someone asked if she had ever performed on stage before. She shook her head. This was the first time. As the crowd thinned, the teacher found her near the piano, gently running her fingers across the keys one last time. "You know," he said quietly, "music like that doesn't just come from skill. It comes from life. Keep that with you," she nodded. "I will," he smiled. "And remember, next time don't wait for permission to play." That night she walked home under a soft drizzle of rain, her heart still full of sound. Every step she took felt lighter. She passed the small shops, the flickering streetlights, the old park where she used to sit and listen to street performers. Everything around her seemed alive. When she reached home, her mother met her at the door. "How was the concert?" she asked, noticing the glow in her daughter's face. "It was..." The girl paused, smiling. "It was everything." Her mother hugged her tightly. "You see? The world just needed to hear what was already inside you." Later that night, she sat by the window again, her small keyboard on her lap. She pressed a few keys and whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't thanking anyone in particular. Maybe the teacher, maybe the piano, maybe the music itself. She was thanking life for giving her that one chance to be heard. The sound that came from her keyboard was soft but full of promise. She knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. The teacher had offered to teach her, and for the first time in her life, she had a real path to follow. The same piano that once stood as a symbol of what she could never have was now a doorway into her future. And though she didn't know what would come next, she was certain of one thing: she would never stop playing. Not for applause, not for fame, but for the feeling that music gave her, the feeling of being alive, understood, and free. As the rain tapped gently against the window, she smiled and whispered to herself, "They finally heard me." And in that quiet moment, with her fingers resting on the keys, she realized that the sound of a single honest note could sometimes be louder than a whole world of noise. The week after the concert felt like a dream she didn't want to wake from. Everywhere she went in the school, people looked at her differently. The same students who once ignored her now greeted her with smiles. Some even stopped to talk, asking how long she had been playing or what songs she had performed. Every time someone mentioned the concert, she blushed and said quietly, "It was nothing." But inside, it meant everything. The teacher had kept his promise. He had spoken to the principal and arranged for her to join the music department as a student. She would no longer just clean the auditorium after classes. She would study there, learn properly, and have access to the real piano. The day she received her first sheet of music, her hands trembled. The paper felt heavy, like it carried a responsibility she wasn't sure she was ready for. But when she placed it on the stand and pressed the first key, that same warmth spread through her chest. She knew she was exactly where she belonged. Her first few lessons were difficult. Reading notes was confusing. Timing, rhythm, and hand coordination all needed practice. Sometimes her fingers cramped. Sometimes she hit the wrong notes, and sometimes she felt frustrated. But every mistake made her want to learn more. The teacher often stayed after class to guide her. "You have the feeling," he told her. "Now we just need to give it structure." She listened carefully to every word. The pianist who once mocked her had changed too. He didn't act arrogant anymore. In fact, one afternoon when everyone else had left, he stayed behind and said, "You know, I used to think talent was only for people who studied early. But you proved me wrong." She smiled politely. "I just love music." "That's all," he nodded. "That's what I forgot to do, love it." From that day, he began treating her with respect. Sometimes they even practiced together, taking turns on the piano, helping each other with difficult passages. Slowly, what began as rivalry turned into friendship built on quiet understanding. Months passed. The school prepared for its annual conservatory auditions, an event where top teachers from the city came to evaluate young musicians and offer them places in higher programs. The teacher encouraged her to apply. At first, she refused. "I can't, I'm not ready." "I've only just started learning properly." But he looked at her firmly. "Music doesn't count years. It counts heart. And yours is ready." So she signed up. The day of the audition, her hands shook as she stood backstage. Around her were students dressed neatly, carrying polished instruments and thick folders of music. She wore her simple dress, the same one she used for school, and held only a few sheets of music, her own handwritten notes. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The lights blinded her again, just like that first day she had played during rehearsal. But this time she wasn't afraid. She knew the stage now. She knew the sound of silence waiting to be filled. She sat down, adjusted the sheet, and began to play. Her fingers moved with a calm confidence. Each note flowed into the next, clear and full of life. The melody wasn't about perfection, it was about truth. Every sound carried a piece of her story. The nights she practiced on her broken keyboard, the day she was laughed at, the moment she found her courage, and the feeling of belonging she had searched for all her life. When she finished, the judges didn't speak for a long moment. Then one of them, an older man with gentle eyes, said softly, "You don't just play the piano. You speak through it." She looked down shyly. "Thank you, sir." A few days later, the results were posted. Her name was on the list. She had earned a scholarship to study at the city conservatory. The teacher called her into his office that afternoon. "Congratulations," he said, handing her the official letter. She couldn't believe it. Her eyes filled with tears. "I never thought this would happen to me," he smiled. "You made it happen. You worked for it. Remember that." That evening, she ran home with the letter pressed tightly against her chest. Her mother was sitting by the small stove when she burst in. "Mama," she shouted, almost breathless. "I got it. They accepted me." Her mother stood up, confused at first, then realized what she meant. "The music school?" She nodded quickly, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Yes, the real one. The big one in the city." Her mother hugged her tightly, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "You did it, my girl," she whispered. "You showed them who you are." That night she couldn't sleep. She kept the letter under her pillow and stared at the ceiling, thinking of how far she had come. The memory of those first days, the teasing, the embarrassment, the fear, all felt like a lifetime ago. Now she was going to study music for real. Her first day at the conservatory was overwhelming. The building was grand, full of long hallways and rooms echoing with sound. Students from all over the country practiced instruments she had only seen in pictures. Yet when she sat down at one of the practice pianos, all her nervousness disappeared. She played the same melody that had changed her life, the simple one she had played back at the school auditorium. When she finished, a few students nearby clapped softly. One of them smiled and said, "That was beautiful." "What piece was that?" She smiled and replied, "It's something I made up." From that day, people began to recognize her. She wasn't just the new student anymore. She became known for her emotional playing, the kind that made listeners stop and feel something real. Her teacher often visited the conservatory to check on her progress. Each time he came, he found her surrounded by students, sharing what she had learned or helping others practice. "You're becoming quite the musician," he told her once. She smiled. "I'm just trying to give back what music gave me." Years later, when she played her first public recital at the City Theater, the hall was full. Among the audience were her old teacher, her mother, and even some of the students from her old school. The same pianist who had once mocked her sat in the front row, smiling proudly. As the lights dimmed, she took a deep breath and placed her hands on the piano. This time, there was no fear, no hesitation, only gratitude. She began to play, and the sound that filled the room was warm and pure, like sunlight finding its way through clouds. Every note carried the story of her journey, the struggle, the laughter, the tears, and the triumph. The audience sat in complete silence, captivated. When the final note faded, the applause erupted, echoing through the hall. She stood bowed and looked out at the faces before her. Her teacher was clapping with tears in his eyes. After the concert, people came to congratulate her, praising her for her performance. Someone asked, "How did you learn to play with so much feeling?" She smiled and said softly, "Because once I had nothing but feeling, and that was enough." Later that night, after everyone had left and the hall was empty, she returned to the piano one last time. She ran her fingers across the smooth keys, remembering that very first touch, the day she had been mocked, the laughter, the humiliation. She whispered to herself, "If only they knew how much that moment gave me." The same piano that once separated her from others had become her bridge to the world. She sat down and played again, not for the audience, not for applause, but for herself. The sound filled the empty hall like a quiet promise that she would never forget where it all began. Outside, the night air was calm. Stars glittered above and the city lights shimmered below. She walked out of the building, her hands still tingling from the keys. The world felt wide open, full of music she had yet to play. Her story had started with silence and mockery, but it ended with harmony and hope. And as she walked down the quiet street, she smiled to herself, whispering the same words she had once said long ago. "They finally heard me." Only this time, she knew the world would never stop listening again.